Say you're a brand new watch enthusiast and you want to get a couple of good watches, and you want good ones, ones that you'll enjoy for many years to come. But you have no idea what brands or models you should explore. Well, stay tuned and I'll provide 3 choices that you might like, and hopefully ease your potential trilemma. Recently, on one of the Facebook watch groups, someone posted this question. If you were advising a newbie watch collector who's just starting out, what watches would you recommend? Further, you'd probably want to suggest some watches of different styles and prices. Lastly, the total cost of the 3 watches should not exceed $2,000. In terms of styles, 3 of the major types might be manual wind watches, chronographs, and automatics, aka self-winding. On the face of it, this challenge does not appear daunting, but given that you'd want to recommend the highest quality, best value watches, maybe with a historical movement or legacy, the 2K constraint could be problematic. And most important of all, you want to recommend to the newbie watch collector watches that they would enjoy owning and wearing for a long time, not watches they'd soon tire of or flip. So the task at hand is coming up with 3 watches, 1 chronograph, 1 automatic, 1 manual wind, all for less than $2,000. There are a large number of reasonably priced automatic watches from which to choose. Choosing a chronograph is a little more difficult because they tend to be more expensive than automatics, and they are simply less affordable ones to choose from. Finally, finding a manual wind watch, I don't mean an automatic that can also be manually wound, I mean a manual wind only watch, is also challenging because there are simply less of them available, especially at non-nosebleed prices. So I decided to select an international array of choices, 1 Japanese, 1 Chinese, and 1 German. Let me describe my choices and my rationale for each one. Choosing an automatic may have been the easiest of all because there are so many choices. Or maybe it's the most difficult to choose because there are so many choices. In either case, I decided not to include a Swiss automatic because they're generally higher cost than a Japanese model. Although if you do want to go Swiss for the automatic, you might consider the Hamilton Khaki King, for example. One can find some pretty nice Japanese watches for under $500. Quite popular are several models from Orient, which is related to, not sure I can call it a subsidiary, of Epson, which is part of the overall Seiko umbrella. Many people like the Bambino models that cost under $200. They look nice, and the movements are pretty good for the price, but they're pretty basic. Remember, the challenge was to recommend watches that a newbie watch enthusiast would be happy with for a long time and not get tired of. So a step up would be something like the Orient Classic, a really nice looking automatic, which has a better movement than the Bambino and even includes a power reserve complication. Costing about $500, but often available for a little bit less, the Classic is a handsome dress watch that should not disappoint a newbie. But I think I'll go with something a little more substantial and a watch that's become an archetypal piece. It's the Seiko SARB 033. Still available, it was quote-unquote discontinued by Seiko a year or so ago in either a black dial version, the 033, or a white dial version, the 035. What makes this watch an icon is that for about $500, you get a solid watch from one of the largest, if not the largest, brands in the business. The SARB 033 has most of the attributes one would expect in a great value choice: sapphire crystal, hacking, that means the second hand stops when the crown is pulled out, manual wind in addition to the self-winding, a display back where you can see the caliber 6R15 ticking away, and a not too large 38.4 millimeter diameter and 11 millimeter height. Many people think that the Seiko's caliber 6R15 is the Japanese equivalent of the ubiquitous ETA 2824 movement. There are other notable features of the Sarb. For example, the dial has a glossy black finish that looks slightly different depending on the lighting. Appropriately proportioned, the razor-sharp sword-style hands contrast nicely with the black dial, making time reading very easy. Also, lug-to-lug dimension is a minimal 45 millimeters, which means that there's little, if any, overhang from the lugs, and the Sarb will sit nicely on smallish wrists. Finally, with a water resistance of 330 feet, you shouldn't be afraid of getting the watch near water. It's not a dive watch. There's no screw-down crown, but this level of water resistance is welcome on a watch at this price. Most watch collectors and enthusiasts who own the quintessential Sarb have bought it in the early days of their watch collecting journey, myself included, and still have it even if they've moved up the price and quality watch food chain. The Sarb 033 is a very attractive dress watch that comes on a bracelet, but also can be dressed down, especially if you put it on a nice leather strap. I'm pretty sure once you get it, you won't grow tired of it. I sure haven't. Now for the chronograph. Finding a chronograph watch that you would enjoy now and even after you become more knowledgeable about watches was a bit of a challenge, mainly because of the price. The ubiquitous Swiss movement, the Valjoux 77XX, is found in quite a few watches, but they all sell for more than $1,000 each, and often closer to $2,000. You can find them in watches ranging from Zinn to IWC to Breitlings. That would have been my choice, but choosing a watch with the 7750 or other Valjoux variant would blow up the budget for this challenge. So I decided to suggest a watch with a pedigree, an interesting story, and a watch that many collectors of even much more expensive pieces own. It's the Seiko 1963 Chrono, an official remake of the 1963 Chinese Air Force chronograph, which is both unique and classic. It sells for about $350, depending upon where you buy it and what version you get. The engine, based on the Venus 175 movement, uses a column wheel, a good thing, and it also runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and has about 45 hours of power when fully wound. And as a bonus, this Seiko is also manual wind. That gets extra points with me. Here's the background. The origin of this watch was that the Chinese government mandated it for pilots in the People's Liberation Army Air Force as Project 304 in 1961. As I mentioned, it's based on the Venus 175 movement, and a long time ago, Venus was a separate movement company that merged with Minerva, another Swiss movement company. In the mid-20th century, the Minerva brand sold off the Venus line to the Chinese. The Seiko 1963 is a remake of that 1961 era watch. It's made by Tianjin Seiko, one of the world's 4 largest watch manufacturers currently in business. There are a number of factors that make this a great choice and a really fun piece, including the sapphire crystal, uncommon at this price point, the display case back where you can see that really cool movement, the Seiko ST21, the gears, levers, etc., doing their thing, and the size, just 38 millimeters by 14 millimeters. That creamy dial with Arabic numbers and markers and the famous red star at 12 o'clock deliver a vintage vibe, since, well, it's a copy of a 50-year-old design. You can also get this watch in a larger 42 millimeter size and without the sapphire crystal. Also available are models with a solid case back. But I'd go for, and did, the version that lets you see that mechanical movement with all its intricacies, since the ST21 is probably the highlight of this watch. You're not likely to find as intricate a movement as this at a price like this Seiko. All mechanical watches are powered by the energy of a mainspring, which, to put it simply, moves gears that move hands. For several decades, many actually, after the wristwatch was formally invented in the early part of the 20th century, most, if not all, watches were wound manually. Of course, the prior 3 centuries of pocket watch movements were all hand-wound. The automatic watch was not invented until the 1930s, give or take a decade or two, and became popular a decade or so after that. These days, most watches you buy are automatic, or so-called self-winding, and there are only a few manual wind-only watches at reasonable prices. Once you get up into the realm of high horology, you see more manual wind models for a number of reasons, including that a rotor, which winds the watch, hides the often beautiful finishing on the movement. A manual wind movement can be slimmer since there's no added height to include that rotor. A manual movement has a 300-year history, and watchmakers prefer designing this type of movement. Finally, a hand-wound movement has fewer parts to go wrong. There are 2 watches I considered as a manual wind model that I believe would be enjoyed for years by a new collector. The Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical and the Stowa Antia KS. I'll briefly mention the Hamilton first. The Hamilton name has long been synonymous with American watchmaking. It was founded in 1892 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and in addition to popular civilian pocket watch and wristwatch models, also served the military market in the U.S. But those days are long gone. In the 1970s, Hamilton picked up lock, stock, and barrel, or should I say, crown, case, and movement, and moved to Switzerland, where they've been making watches ever since. As part of the Swatch Group, making mechanical watches in the U.S. apparently was no longer viable, and the quartz crisis, which severely cut the demand for mechanical watches, didn't help. The Khaki Field Mechanical, or Khaki Mechanical for short, maybe not that much shorter, is derivative of the military watch Hamilton made in the 1960s. First off, the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical has a solid case back, so you're not going to see that movement. It's Hamilton's 2804-2, but it's really a manual wind ETA 2801-2, a movement that's not only robust, but it's been around for quite a while. Nothing wrong with that. So it's going to be the other features of this watch, which may or may not sway you into its fold over the Stowa. Notable features of the Hammy are the drilled lugs, which make strap changes easy, and you will want to change the straps, whether to put on a NATO, a fabric strap, or maybe a nice leather strap, or something else entirely. Changing straps on a watch is part of the fun of owning a watch, and it's especially easy on the Khaki. The case size is only 38 millimeters, but the longish lugs, lug-to-lug distance is 47 millimeters, makes the watch wear a little bit larger on the wrist. Finally, the dial is highly readable, as were the military watches Hamilton made, and on which this style is based. One could read the time from across the room almost. It's that good. Perhaps the best part is the watch just looks so darn good. For $400, it's tough to beat if you're looking for a field watch that's manually wound. However, there are at least 2 attributes I consider to be must-haves in a manual wind watch. A pedigreed movement that is attractive, and a display caseback so you can see that beautiful movement. With the Stowa Antia Classic KS, it's what's under the hood, which is the star of the show, since this Stowa meets both of those criteria. Like the Hamilton, the Stowa's Passau ETA 7001 movement has about a 42-hour power reserve when fully wound, but it beats at a more leisurely 21,600 beats per hour rather than 28,800 beats per hour of the Khaki. Supposedly, a lower oscillation rate imparts less wear and tear on the movement, if only minimally. Although the almost 50-year-old Passau doesn't hack, it's a robust movement that's been used in a number of other watch brands. When Nomos first started out, they used a 7001 in their Tangenta reference, and later they based their in-house Alpha caliber on the same movement. Montblanc, Omega, Tissot, Young Hands, just to name a few brands, have all used the 7001, either in its simple form or nicely finished, which it does take well to. With its thin and smallish diameter, this movement is most suitable for dress watches that, by today's standards, are on the small side. And that's exactly what we have here. A dress watch in the Bauhaus style with a very nicely decorated movement. It has what the Swiss would call Geneva stripes, but the Germans might call Engelsbrandstreifen, blued steel screws, and rhodium plating on its classic three-plate design, all visible through the display back. Bauhaus was a famous German art school from about the first couple decades of the 20th century. Their mantra, whether applying to art, typography, consumer products, or architecture, was form follows function. That is, the functionality of the object is the primary focus of design. Stowa was one of the first watch companies to use this design style when they first introduced their Bauhaus watch in 1937. Other features of the Antia of note are drilled lugs, making strap changes simple and quick, sapphire crystals on the front with internal AR coating and on the back sides, a beautiful silver dial that almost changes color depending on the light, from white to cream to silvery, and a watch with a pedigree and excellent highly finished movement. The Antia KS is a watch that is more than what it first appears. For example, take the Arabic letters in the attractive Bauhaus font. Did you notice that the numbers on the dial from 4 to 8 are read from the outside, and the numbers from 9 to 3 are read from the inside? What about that very fine concentric rings on the subdial? A subtle touch for sure, but classy. Finally, the baton hands have been thermally blued, not painted, so that normally they appear black, but when viewed in the right light, radiate a bright blue. Against the creamy dial, it's just stunning. Don't be afraid of the Antia's minimalist 36mm case size. The Antia wears larger on your wrist than you would initially think. Plus, smaller watches were in the mainstream for most of the latter 20th century, until oversized watches came into vogue. A smaller watch is more suitable as a dress watch and has a certain timeless style to it. The Antia KS sells for about $1,200, but can be found for less with some patient searching and buying from a trusted seller. With the Stowa Antia KS, you're getting a Bauhaus gem and a watch with an honest heritage. Mechanical watches are miniature machines, and that is certainly part of the attraction. If you choose wisely, do your research ahead of time, you can make watch purchases that you won't regret. These are just my 3 suggestions, and I probably could have chosen more than one set of 3. Likely, other watch enthusiasts and collectors might disagree with my choices, but that's okay. Learning and sharing information is what this hobby is all about. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your watch friends, and subscribe, if you already haven't, so as to be alerted of new content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.